Let's start with the myth that you can't improve at LSAT reading comp. You either get it or you don't. Wrong, wrong, wrong. I heard that too, and I actually believed it for a while, but then I raised my own score by 23 points, and a huge part of that came from cracking reading comp. The section is beatable, but not with the usual advice. The biggest mistake I see is that people read the passage like they're getting ready to write an essay about it. Because that's what you were taught in high school and college. You take notes on every line, you track every detail, and you underline key phrases. Sure, that might make sense in an academic setting, but it's going to crush your timing and your comprehension on a test like the LSAT. So here's what I did instead. No highlighting, no annotating, no obsessing over details. Instead, just find the big picture. What's the main idea? Why did the author write the passage? What are the different points of view? And how is the argument structured? That is it. If you try to remember every fact, you're going to drown in the details. But if you read to locate, rather than memorize, you're going to move faster and answer more questions accurately. I trained myself over time to read each passage in under 3 minutes. That left me plenty of time, around 6 minutes, to tackle the associated questions. And that forced me to be ruthless about what I paid attention to. So the question becomes, how do you read faster without missing key information? You've got to use a mental framework for each passage. Every passage has a structure, and once you learn to see it, the whole section unlocks. Here are 3 questions I used to guide my reading. First, what is the topic? Second, what is the purpose? And third, what is the structure? If you can identify those 3 things early on, you're going to have a map of the passage. And once you have that, you don't get lost in the weeds anymore. So for example, a passage might give you 2 competing theories about how birds evolved flight. One theory says they were gliding from trees. Another says they were running and flapping their wings. The author likes one and criticizes the other. Knowing that, rather than all the scientific jargon, is what helps you answer almost every question. That mental scaffolding becomes like your internal GPS. You can zoom in or zoom out whenever you need to without rereading the whole thing. Of course, the passage alone is not enough. You've also got to understand how to approach the questions, and I like to reorder them for maximum efficiency. That is a game changer. Most people just go through the questions in the order provided, but that is a huge mistake because the LSAT deliberately mixes up question types. Some are general, some are detailed, some require you to read between the lines, and they put them for you in no particular order. They don't get progressively harder like they do in logical reasoning. It's more of a random shuffle. So if you go in order, you risk spending 90 seconds on the hardest question first before you're even warmed up. So here's the order I used instead. First, I would start with the global questions like main idea, primary purpose, author's opinion, and passage structure. These should ideally require 0 rereading because they rely on your big picture grasp from your initial read. Then, you go on to the local detail questions which point you to a specific line or paragraph. You can answer them by going back to that specific part of the passage. And finally, you save the inference questions for last, because these require the most abstract thinking and they're often phrased in confusing ways. But if you do them last, you have a stronger mental model of the passage by that point, so you're more likely to get them right. And this strategy doesn't just save you time, it also builds up your momentum. Because by the time you reach the harder questions, your understanding is deeper and your confidence is higher. Now I know a lot of the passage topics are pretty boring, and that is by design. They don't want you to be interested in them. They want to see how you handle dense, unfamiliar information under pressure. So what I did is I made a mental game out of it. Whenever a passage felt dry, I would ask myself, how would I explain this to a 10-year-old? What is the dumbed down version of this argument, and who are the good guys and the bad guys in this debate? Suddenly, a philosophy passage became a boxing match between objectivists and relativists, and a science passage became a Twitter feud between 2 different researchers fighting for a grant. I know that might sound silly, but it worked and it kept me engaged. And engagement means comprehension. Because I stopped zoning out, I stopped rereading, and I started scoring higher. So if you struggle with reading comp fatigue, this alone can change the game. Now, over time, I noticed something weird. the same themes kept showing up again and again. Sure, they were different topics, but underneath, structurally, they were nearly identical. Here are two patterns that came up over and over again. The first was an old theory succeeded by new research, and the other was objective truth versus subjective experience. Once I saw these patterns in the themes of reading comp, I was able to start predicting which questions would come up after the passage text. This let me go on autopilot for certain passages in an ideal circumstance, because once you have enough reps, you start to recognize the structures instinctively. It's like building muscle memory, but for reading. Now, if you've ever watched a chess player analyze a game, you're going to notice something. They're not just casually observing, they are competing with the board. That's how I approached reading comp, because I wasn't just reading to understand, I was reading to beat the passage. That meant I could anticipate common trap answers based on shifts in tone, and I could ask myself, why was this sentence included after every paragraph, and I understood the role that it played. You don't need to read more books to improve at reading comp. You just need to read LSAT reading comp passages the right way, with purpose, under time pressure, and with a laser focus on test day logic. Now remember, you are not bad at reading comp no matter how you're scoring, you're just not trained yet. It might feel intimidating because it's punishing you for using school-style reading habits on a test where that doesn't apply. But once you rewire how you approach it and you focus on frameworks, structure, timing, and mental energy, this section becomes just like logical reasoning. It becomes a skill that you can build. You're not bad at it, you're just at the beginning of the learning curve.